Less than an hour ago, the fast of Tisha B'Av ended, but not the mourning, the sorrow, or the destruction. Because despite our now filled stomachs and somewhat relaxed spirits, the Beit HaMikdash is still destroyed. Rabbi is not really biadenu. We are in galut, and God's glory is so often obscured. And yet somehow, Chazal felt that we should be comforted and assured, designating this Shabbat as Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort, as we will read in the Haftarah, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, which means comfort, comfort my people. But how is that possible? How are we supposed to just flick a switch and recover from the 3 weeks, the 9 days, and Tisha B'Av? How can we be expected to return to life after the memories of today? The answer may be at the beginning of this week's parashah, and may be one more connection between this week's Haftarah of comfort and what we will read about in Vaetchanan, the continuing saga of Moshe Rabbeinu's farewell address. As the parashah opens, Vaetchanan el Hashem, and I pleaded with God, said Moshe, pleaded with him to be allowed to enter into Eretz Yisrael. But God not only said no, but v'yitaber Hashem bi l'manchem. He was angry at me for making this request, said Moshe, because of you, v'lo shama elai. And therefore, God refused to listen to my pleas. But why? Why was Moshe Rabbeinu denied the opportunity to do tshuva? Why was he unable to receive forgiveness, denied a response so central to our belief? According to some, the answer is because Moshe Rabbeinu's sin was simply too great, and the time had come for the next generation of leadership. While Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal, quoting from the Sifrei, saw the answer in the word lema'anchem, because of you. As the Rav explained, had all of Klal Yisrael prayed for Moshe Rabbeinu's forgiveness, it would have been granted. But they didn't. They didn't appreciate what they had. And they left Moshe to pray by himself, Vaetchanan. I prayed. I pleaded all along, said Moshe. Yet there might be another answer that also addresses our central challenge of finding comfort, of flicking that switch. An answer that's as simple as the reality that sometimes it's too late for change to occur. Yehoshua had already been installed as Moshe Rabbeinu's successor. The generation of Egypt was gone, and Aaron and Miriam had passed away. Too much had changed, and now was the time for Moshe, as painful as it was, to leave the stage of Jewish history and to ascend the mountain and return to God. Because sometimes things happen that we regret, things that we wish were never happening, things about which we yearn to turn back the clock, and yet after the wheels are already set in motion, it's too late. And what we need to learn in life is how to move forward with the reality that stands before us. We can mourn, we can pine for what was, but we also need to find a path towards comfort. And that is what Moshe Rabbeinu struggled to achieve at the beginning of this week's parasha. And so he prayed and he pleaded. He begged HaKadosh Baruch Hu to change the decree, and he even imagined how it could happen, but it didn't. And when Moshe Rabbeinu realized that it was too late, he didn't retreat into himself, didn't continue to mourn. Instead, he launched into doing what he could. He identified 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan River. He reviewed the 10 commandments, and he gave us the Shema. He did more in this parasha than one could ever expect, rising above the pain of God's decree and looking towards the future. Ki tolid banim, to future generations, ki yaviacham, and to a future destination, which is how we can be expected to go from Tisha B'Av to this Shabbat of Nachamu, from mourning to comfort, from destruction to rebuilding, from despair to promise. That's what those who have lost loved ones, please God, ultimately learn to do. And that's what those who have faced disappointment and even failure learn to do. They find the strength to accept the new reality of life, to look forward and not just back, to seek comfort and not remain in sorrow. Nachamu, nachamu, ami. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. And that's what we must strive to do. But there's one more thing that helped Moshe along the way. Something that helps us when we're down as well. It's a phrase that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used in this exchange that at first glance recalled a harrowing moment in Jewish history, and yet it's a phrase that may have given Moshe Rabbeinu the hope and the strength to find comfort, to flip that switch and move onward. Because when God said no, he added the phrase, Rav lach, enough already. Al tosef daber elai od. I don't want to hear anything more about this. Rav lach, enough already, said God. But God wasn't the first one to have used those words. Moshe Rabbeinu himself had used them, but not now, but 38 years earlier, during the rebellion of Korach, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Rav lachem b'nei Levi, enough already, the sons of Levi. Why would God use the words Moshe had once used to quell a rebellion? What was the connection? Said Rav Schwab, God wanted to remind Moshe of something he had understood so many years before, that Korach should have been content with his role as a Levi. Korach should have been content transporting the Mishkan, setting it up when needed, and dismantling it when needed. Said Moshe Rabbeinu to Korach, what you do behind the scenes is more altruistic. Sheyesh lachem ma'ala miyuchedet shel avodah lishma. Why? Why would you want more? Said God to Moshe, Moshe, what you have accomplished behind the scenes, taking the Jews out of Egypt, preparing them to enter the land, what you have accomplished, Rav lach, it's enough. Even though you are not going to Eretz Yisrael, shal yedei zeh tiheh avodatcha me'ula yoter, because not going actually makes the preparation more significant. It makes your work more sublime. In all of our lives, disappointments occur, sorrows arise, and tragedies happen. And yet we must learn to rise above them, as did Moshe Rabbeinu. And our parasha is teaching us that the way to flick the switch is by focusing on the good, focusing on what we have, and not only on what we don't. Embrace the gifts that God has given us. Appreciate the moments of opportunity and joy. Regale in the possibilities that are before us and see the wonders, the tenacity and the faith of the Jewish people, whether in exile or today in the land of Israel. And then, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. There will be comfort, not because the glass is full, but because we have a glass and it can be filled. Shabbat Shalom.